Hello everyone and welcome back to the Fruit of Grisaia. It's a new week, and with my other series having come to a close, you know what that means. Daily Grisaia videos. I know you're all excited, please calm down. In the last episode, Kazuki kind of went on a little diatribe about how she really loves her brother, doing things no sister should ever do to her brother, and Amane's like, what? And yeah, that was pretty much how that episode went. So, if you liked the video, and subscribe if you want to see more Grisaia by yours truly.
チョコレートもダメだって言うよね。
You can't feed a dog onions, apparently. No good with chocolate either.
それこそ犬に食べさせるぐらいなら
Chocolate
自分で
kills the
食べますよ。
dog. At least large quantities.
まあね。私も小森に同じようなこと言ったらさ、なんか責任感じたみたいで。犬が食べられそうなもの探すって、今日も朝からずっと山の中を歩き回ってるよ。
The green-haired girl's kind of bummed out because of the fact that her partner has her dog with her, which means there's another mouth to feed, and she's not happy.
へえ、トリュフでも見つけてくるんですかね。あれ？トリュフは豚が探すんじゃなかった？
何にせよ、犬だけじゃなくて、私たちの食べるものが問題ですよね。
Yes, the food
こ
situation
の
is
まま
becoming
雑草ばっ
dire.
かり食べてても、そう長くは持ちませんよ。
Having waited 3 days, we could hold out another 7. That was Kazuki's estimate. We'd stay here for another week, sipping on weed soup. If our rescuers hadn't arrived by then, we'd have no choice but to get help ourselves. Most likely, the captain was preserving a stock of food for that purpose. But when I said as much, Kennedy scowled dubiously.
でもさ、救助を呼びに行くってどうやって？
As she spoke, Kaneda scratched irritably at the bandage wrapped around her forehead. The wound underneath must have been growing itchy in the humidity.
誰か一人代表者を決めて、その人に水と食料を託して山を降りてもらうんです。降りられるならとっくにそうしてるでしょうが。こんな道もないような山、どうやって降りるのよ。どっちに進めばいいのかすらわからないのに。だから部長と先生はそれを調べるために今も山に入っているんじゃないですか。責任者の自主的な行動って言えば聞こえはいいけどさ、それって無駄に食料を減らしてるだけじゃん。いっそのこと全員で別々の方向に山を降りればいいんだよ。だからそれは。
We didn't have nearly enough provisions for a gamble like that, and we couldn't just abandon the wounded. There was only one practical plan: endure as long as we could on these meager rations, call open a path through the wilderness that trapped us here, hope all the while for the arrival of our rescuers. And then, once our investigations yielded something in the way of landmarks, send off a representative with 3 days' worth of food. When another 3 days passed, we could send off a second representative by following the signs the first had left to mark the surest trail. They should make it further down the mountain. Lashing one short stick to the next, slowly but surely we would draw closer to our objective. That was an idea that had grown out of Kazuki's theoretical digital communication plan. If we could repeat this often enough, in theory we would eventually be able to escape, but there were no guarantees, and I found myself hesitant to explain.
喧嘩はやめましょうよ。それこそ無駄にお腹が減るだけじゃないですか。
喧嘩なんてしてないじゃん。話し合ってるだけだよ。
だったらその無駄にイライラした口調やめてもらっていいですか？Amaneに八つ当たりしたって仕方がないでしょう。
私がいつ八つ当たりしたってのよ。
金田、それに息吹もその辺にしときなよ。
I've often heard that a calcium deficiency makes you prone to fits of irritability, but at that moment, although all of our diets were badly imbalanced, the main cause of our crankiness was clearly the constant gnawing hunger we all shared. It's easy to be polite on a full stomach, as they say. In the end, we kept at our game of cards until Captain Sakashita and Mr. Oshi returned from their expedition. I finished with a so-so record of 3 defeats and 4 victories. In exchange for 3 of the 12 blocks of chocolate from my bar, I obtained 4 pieces of soft candy wrapped in aluminum foil. Against the contrast of my slightly dirty palm and muddy fingernails, the spoils of war looked irresistibly beautiful. I brought one to my nose and inhaled deeply at the bittersweet scent of strawberry wafting through the wrapper. My mouth was instantly overflowing with drool. There were 4 candies in my palm. If I popped one in my mouth right now, nobody would ever know. It wouldn't even be a net loss to my group. I would have lost 3 small pieces of chocolate and brought back 3 comparable chunks of sugar. As my thoughts raced unbidden through these calculations, I swallowed and spit in my mouth. But as it slid lukewarm down my throat, I came to my senses with a guilty jolt. It would be dishonest, unfair, cowardly to eat one now. Nothing less than a betrayal to Kazuki. And once I betrayed her, I would probably continue to do so. It'd be a gateway crime. Gateway betrayal. That was a line I could not cross.
何か悩み事？あまね。
God, don't do that.
どうかした？かつき、あなた、分かってて私をいじめているの？何のこと？全然わからないわ。
It really seemed like a deliberately timed appearance on her part. But even if it was a coincidence, Kazuki's luck to appear at that exact moment would have been frightening in its own right. After one long deep breath, I jerked my head down in a bow of apology.
ごめん、カズキ。私今、カズキに内緒でつまみ食いしようか悩んでた。あら、正直。そんなの黙っていればわからないのに。わからないからこそ、汚い行為なんだよ。
We couldn't sleep if we'd done that. I held the soft candies I'd won in the game and the remains of the chocolate bar to Kazuki. Cupping her hands gently over mine to receive them, Kazuki flashed me a satisfied smile.
大丈夫よ。それができないあなただから、私はあなたに全てを任せたのだから。はい。あーんしなさい。
I can feed myself, thank you.
あーん。
Kazuki deftly unwrapped one of the candies she'd received from me, then plopped the small white pillow into my half-open mouth.
おいしい？
The candy was unbelievably sweet to my tongue. My entire mouth was instantly flooded with the taste of sugar, and in the next moment it felt as though that vibrant sweetness was seeping into my veins and spreading throughout my body. That single piece of candy was so delicious I was actually trembling. Kazuki watched affectionately as I rolled my eyes up in bliss and swirled the candy clumsily around in my mouth, then popped another of the candies into her own mouth. And with the words, "Goodness, it really is tasty," smelled in pleasure.
でも、こういった熱量食は一人でこっそりと食べた方が美味しいのかもしれないわね。どうして？私の弟がそうだったの。変に禁欲的というか、好きなものをあげてもあまり喜ばないし、後で一人で隠れてこっそり食べるの。どうしてって聞けば、下手に喜ぶと誰かに取り上げられるかもしれないし、一人の方が落ち着くっていうのよね。人間は喜んでいる瞬間が一番無防備だということをすでにあの年齢で知っているのだから、さすがは私の弟ね。そういう卑屈に歪んでいるところもすごく可愛いわ。なんだかわかるようなわからないような。理解しない方が幸せよ。特に家族に対してすら不器用にしか生きられない人間はね。
Family. That brief word resonated painfully inside me. It felt as though an icicle had unexpectedly pierced my chest to the core. What were my parents doing right now? Were they worrying about their missing daughter? It was a little past 5 o'clock. Normally I would have been heading home after school practice right about now. I tended to come home a little hungry from practice. The refrigerator would be packed full of sweet drinks. On the kitchen table, more snacks than I could possibly need were always waiting for me. After a satisfying snack, I could head to the bathroom and take a long, luxurious soak in steaming hot water. Then a cool down with a cup of cold milk, idly distorting my voice in the electric fan while my mother prepared dinner. Without even asking, my parents offered me more food than I could eat. I accepted it without a second thought, often without even a word of thanks. That stupid, ungrateful ignorance filled me with a bitter shame. But at the same time, comparing myself then to the filthy, frightened girl who just quivered ecstatically over a single piece of candy. I couldn't repress a surge of miserable self-pity.
Amane? どうして泣くの？
泣いてないよ。
周りを見てごらんなさい。
As instructed, I looked around the area only to find it deserted.
今はあなたと私しかいないわ。
There's no need to hold back. The instant those words left her mouth, I felt a tear gland swell up in the corner of my eyes. My self-restraint crumbled like sand, and I burst into violent sobs. Crying wasn't going to fix anything. Nobody was going to swoop down and rescue me, no matter how much I grieved over my own powerlessness and ignorance. There were no do-overs to be had. What was done couldn't be undone.
帰りたい。私、帰りたいよ、カズキ。
Hiding my twisted, wretched expression behind the palm of my hand, I crumpled to my knees on the spot. Without a word, Kazuki drew near, wrapped her arms around my head, and hugged me against her slender stomach. Pathetic. Utterly pathetic. When I was still a child, there was a girl among the neighborhood kids who'd break into tears at the slightest thing. I remember thinking of her as a nuisance, a stupid, useless crybaby. If I weep, somebody will come help me. Somebody will take pity on me and solve my problems for me. The transparent self-interest behind her actions was just as irritating as the blubbering itself. And now I'd become just such a worthless, moaning crybaby, rubbing my runny nose against the belly of a girl considerably smaller than me, sobbing into her skirt.
ごめん、カズキ。ごめんね。許して。
いいのよ。大丈夫。今すぐってわけにはいかないけれど、いつか必ず私があなたを家に帰してあげる。
As she spoke, Kazuki took one arm from around my head and began to softly stroke my hair. My family wasn't with me. There's no way such a pointless, clingy little breakdown could have been anything but irritating to anyone in this place. They were all suffering just the same. But even so, Kazuki didn't push me aside. She held me gently in her arms and accepted it all, offering me soothing, hopeful words. That kindness was painful in its own right, but at the same time it felt like an irreplaceably precious gift.
カズキは辛くないの？帰りたくないの？
Turning my face up from Kazuki's belly, I met her gaze with watery eyes and mumbled a distinctly childish question. She gave a little laugh, her stomach shaking lightly against mine, and answered, "Don't worry about me. I'm a genius."
帰りたいかと聞かれれば、それはもちろん帰りたいわ。私がいないうちに弟が両親にいじめられてやしないかと思うと気が気じゃないわ。
Closing a single eye, Kazuki furrowed her brow and pursed her lips.
こんなことになるのなら、小森さんが犬をそうしたように、私も弟をバッグに詰めて内緒で連れ込んでしまえばよかった。失敗したわね。
No, I'm pretty sure that wouldn't have worked out too well for you. With one final loud sniffle, I found my sobs had suddenly given way to a small burst of laughter.
天才でも失敗するんだ。
もちろん天才だって失敗はするわ。失敗を失敗で終わらせない人を天才というのよ。そしてそれに一生気がつかない人を凡人と呼ぶの。
天才も楽じゃないね。
私の苦労を思いばかる余裕が出たのなら、そろそろ泣き止んでいただける？大の男を腹で泣かせることができれば女として一人前だとは言うけれど、あなたは女の子だしね。そろそろ鬱陶しいかも。
優しくないな、カズキは。
それは心外だわ。私だってできることならあなたが泣き疲れて眠ってしまうまでベッドで絵本でも読んであげたいけれど、ここにはベッドも絵本もないのだから仕方がないでしょ。
At least one of your hands are tied.
ごめんね。 多分もう大丈夫だから。なんだろうね。自分でもなんで急に泣いたのかわからないよ。
流した涙はきっちりと舐めておきなさい。貴重な塩分がもったいないわ。それと
Gotta keep all the nutrients you can. Kazuki reached out, took my hand, and dropped all the remaining candy and chocolate onto my palm.
これはあなたに預けます。即効性の高い熱量食は貴重よ。私がいいと言うまで手をつけずに保管すること。いい？
わかった。
If Kazuki wasn't trusting me with such important provisions, it was clear, and she genuinely trusted me. I absolutely couldn't betray that trust. Biting my lower lip with this heavy sense of responsibility, I stared intently at the chocolate in my hand. Watching my reaction, Kazuki sighed slowly through her nose.
生真面目なのはいいけれど、責任と責任感を履き違えないことね。そうやって何でも我慢して耐えちゃう子は弟を見ているようで切なくなるし、そんな子は長生きはできないわよ。
責任と責任感って何が違うの？
負うべきものが責任。負わなくていいものまで追いたがるのが責任感。その境目を見失わないように。
よくわからないけど、わかったふりだけしておくよ。うん。
I don't get it. But I don't need to get it either. If Kazuki says so, then that's the way it is. I was aware I'd taken an easy path in letting someone else think for me, but honestly, I didn't really care anymore. Clumsy idiot who tries to take a heavy burden on their shoulders won't achieve anything but catastrophic failure. I understood that just fine even before Kazuki drove the point home. For that very reason, I decided to obey her orders without a second thought. Kazuki told me I couldn't eat that candy without her permission, so I would sit on my haunches, slobbering like a dog until she spoke the magic words. If permission never came, I'd wait out the years and carry them to my grave. In this situation, where nothing seemed certain except uncertainty, the only thing I had come to believe in was Kazami Kazuki. I kept the thought to myself, since I was well aware she'd only offer another sarcastic, "Might you be mistaking me for God?" in response. But at this point, I probably would have answered, "Huh, you're not?" That's what Kazami Kazuki's become for me. Raining. The fifth day in the valley. Let's begin from the conclusion. Today it rained all day long. To be honest, I had no idea rain could be this unpleasant. The constant drumming of water against the tent was unexpectedly loud, enough to make conversation difficult, and the light entering the tent was far dimmer than usual, thanks to my strong astigmatism. Everything seemed fuzzy and indistinct, so it was extremely difficult to do much of anything. But the bigger problem was the rainwater that oozed up from the ground beneath us, and the damp chill it brought. This morning I woke up to a real double whammy, the psychological jolt of emerging from a familiar nightmare, and the physical pain of a throbbing headache. I piled 2 mats under my sleeping bag last night, but when I came to, it was soaking wet. My body temperature had fallen as I slept, and the chilled blood running through my veins had numbed the blood vessels in my brain. Even after waking, my calorie-starved body struggled to warm itself, my teeth chattering uncontrollably in my mouth. I stared reproachfully up through the tent at the merciless sky. Changing out my wet clothes might have helped matters somewhat, if my spare outfit hadn't been soaked through as well. I hit on the idea of a hot drink after a few minutes, but it was pouring outside the tent. Starting a fire would have been difficult, and more importantly, the fierce sound of rain striking against the canvas had thoroughly drained me of the willpower to even poke my head outside.
玉ねぎ茶、もう一杯飲む?
Apparently unable to just sit back and watch, Kazuki had ventured out in the midst of the downpour for my sake, bringing back boiling water for our onion skin extract beverage. This stuff was never really worthy of the name tea, but by now we let some of those skins seep so many times it was little more than faintly yellow water. Of course, I was plenty happy to have even that, and Kazuki's act of mercy contrasted so strongly with my own cowardice that I felt about ready to cry with gratitude. But when I glanced over her sitting there, her wet hair matted like a stray dog's coat, I couldn't exactly fire off a casual, "Sure, a refill would be nice." My hand still gripping the empty cup, I slowly shook my head.
ひどい雨だね。
It is awful, isn't
明
it?
け方近くに大きな雷が何度も落ちたのに、あなた全然目を覚まさなかったわね。
なんか大きな音がしてるなとは思ったけど。
Even when the roars jolted me awake for a moment, my listlessness quickly overwhelmed me again. I simply didn't have the energy to wake up that early. Immediately after the fall, I'd been unable to sleep through the night. As I dozed lightly with the frequent interruptions, morning often seemed to sneak up on me before I knew it. But lately that had changed dramatically. Once I managed to doze off, it was very difficult to wake up. More and more, falling asleep felt like sinking into a thick bed of mud.
疲れてるのかな。
肉体的というよりは精神的な疲労が濃いのでしょうね。それと単純に環境に慣れ始めたのが原因ね。過酷な環境に慣れないうちは寝ている間に記憶の整理を行いながらも周囲の状況に警戒を怠らないから小さな物音でも目を覚ましてしまうのよ。
It was unplausible, now that you mentioned it. The first few days sleeping in the tent, the stirring of a neighbor next door would be enough to jerk me awake, and my eyes would be open automatically at the first light of dawn. In that respect, Kazami Kazuki was an ideal tent mate. Once asleep, she'd lie so still in her bag, I sometimes half worried she'd suddenly die in there. I never once heard her snore or grunt in her sleep. Lately, Kazuki has been sleeping on a very regular schedule. We'd start preparations for dinner at 6:30 p.m., and finish our meal by 7, or whatever passed for a meal at this point at least. By 8 o'clock, I noticed her stifling small yawns, and around 9 o'clock, she'd come out and declare herself sleepy. At 10 o'clock, she'd crawl into her tent, cheerfully spread out her sleeping bag, take off her uniform, and leave it neatly folded at her bedside. And the instant her head hit the rucksack she used for a pillow, she'd exhale noisily just once and go silent. Within 10 seconds, I'd hear the soft, regular breathing that indicated she'd fallen asleep. Boy, I'd love to be able to sleep like that, just instantaneously almost. Of course, I couldn't flip the switch to sleep mode quite so easily or on such a predictable schedule. My conversational partner lost. I had very little to do with myself late at night, so until I managed to fall asleep, I'd stave off boredom by staring at Kazuki's sleeping face. After a few minutes in dreamland, she'd occasionally She'd occasionally make faces in her sleep, most often furrowing her brow in a caricature of a triple dot, sometimes smiling dopily at nothing in particular.
ねえ、和樹って夢を見たりするの？
そうね。看護師さんとかお花屋さんとかケーキ屋さんなんて素敵ね。
Not those kind of dreams.
そういう話じゃなくってさ。
And in the first place, what's with the half-assed attempt at pretending you're some run-of-the-mill girl with cutesy little dreams? Forget being a nurse, you'd be much better suited to the role of a black market surgeon with a tattered old doctor's robe. Florist, cupcake peddler, try con artist. Maybe the founder of some sketchy cult.
ああ、夢って睡眠時に見る方の話？それならもちろん見るわよ。
どんな夢？
今日見たのは学校に入りたての頃、学食のセルフサービスのシステムがよくわからなくて戸惑った時の夢を見たわ。基本的に過去に経験した記憶の再配置が多いかしら。空を飛んだりするような夢はあまり見ないわね。
そうなんだ。私は最近高いところから落ちる夢をよく見るよ。
I've had dreams of the sort ever since I was a child. Most often, I'd fallen from the top of a cliff. As the ground beneath my feet crumbles to nothing and I plunge downward, I stare in quiet composure at the earth far below. My thoughts are oddly calm. I guess I'm gonna land right above there. And as long as I kept that detached perspective, I've never seemed to hit the ground. But eventually, it occurs to me that I'm dreaming. In the next moment, I'm slammed into the earth and jerk awake in my bed, my whole body rigid with shock. What might a dream like that signify? Kazuki's answer was brief. It means you're uneasy. Other than falling, my most common dream was probably of the running variety. This very morning, I found myself fleeing some vaguely defined but menacing pursuers. A countless number of black shadows hot on my heels, I was pushing my way desperately forward through oily, thick air, dragging my strangely heavy legs along the ground. The illusion was unusually persistent. Even when I realized it was just a dream, I kept its hold on me. Just as I began to beg myself to wake up, my eyes had slowly opened to the sensation of that throbbing headache. I turned on my cell phone briefly to check the time. Apparently, it was already past 2 p.m. The rain was still hammering fiercely down. By now, the tent was half submerged in muddy water. There was nothing to do but curl myself up in my heavy, wet uniform, rubbing my arms and trembling from the cold. Although I was doing nothing at all, my stomach was still growling, and although my stomach was growling, it was still raining outside. Thinking of the time it would take to start cooking a cooking fire, I lost all motivation to try. What were the other girls doing right now? I took a quick glance out the underside of the tent, but there didn't seem to be anyone moving through the downpour. They must have all been quietly enduring the storm in their tents. The steady drumming of the rain was the only sound I could hear. The cries of the cicadas, so vigorous and persistent when the weather was clear, were utterly gone. So too the eerie shrieks of the unseen birds hidden in the treetops above.
Kazuki?
Suddenly wanting to hear another human voice, I called Kazuki's name. There was no response. When I looked over, I found Kazuki sitting on her sleeping mat just as before, but at some point her eyes had fallen closed. Every day Kazuki would take a nap sometime between 2 and 3 in the afternoon. It was never more than a quick 15-minute doze, so the first few times I thought she'd nodded off out of exhaustion. But it happened every day at roughly the same time, so it soon became obvious this little siesta was part of her schedule. Nobody's going to complain if you lie down like a normal person. Of course, considering the minor flood we had going on in here, that probably wouldn't have been much more relaxing an option at the moment. This was a grave problem indeed. We'd have to think of a countermeasure of some sort before it happened again. But the damp floor isn't the only inconvenience brought on by the rain. For one thing, writing in this diary isn't easy when the pages are wet. And unfortunately, I've been in the grips of a much more serious dilemma for a little while now. Probably thanks to that big mug of onion tea this morning, I'm currently enduring a desperate need for a visit to the bathroom. The urge to pee was painfully intense, requiring constant effort to restrain. My pen trembled against the diary pages as I wrote. I surveyed the interior of the tent but found nothing that might serve as a makeshift umbrella or raincoat. When this rain lets up, I'm going straight to the captain, proposing we cobble together an outhouse with the roof. I'm making a special note of that here, so it can't possibly slip my mind.